Hi everyone, this is the first of a three-part series on your digestive system. So what are the main functions of the digestive system? Well, the big one is to take in food and then to break it down into its building blocks, then to absorb those molecules, those building blocks across the bloodstream, and then ultimately get rid of anything that our body was unable to digest. So the organs of the digestive system, there's two main sides to this. There's what's called the alimentary canal. It has some alternative names like the gastrointestinal tract or the GI tract or simply the gut. And basically what that is the big fancy garden hose that runs through the middle of you. It's a muscular tube that goes from the mouth all the way through to the other end. And what does it do as food is passing through that tube? It digests the food into smaller fragments. Specifically, it's going to break it down into its building blocks. So you need to go back to chapter 2 when we talked about the building blocks of the macromolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Then those broken down little pieces are small enough to pass over the digestive lining into the blood. So the organs of the alimentary canal include the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the two intestines, and the anus. Then we have the other side of the digestive system, and that is the side that we call the accessory digestive organs. So these are going to be all of the things that are processing or adding things to the food in the tube, but food is not going directly through it. So we're talking about teeth and tongue and gallbladder, as well as the digestive glands that are helping to break things down, including the salivary glands, the liver, and the pancreas. So there is the whole thing all kind of together. So I always keep it straight by asking myself, does food go through it? If that's the case, then it's part of the alimentary canal, or does food go by it? And if that case, it's an accessory structure. So here's some examples of how peristalsis works on the left-hand side. So um, the um, the mass of food that you swallow down becomes something called the bolus. And so we're just squeezing and pushing it through and squeezing and pushing it through. Later, in a couple of minutes here, we'll talk about the idea of segmentation. So apparently we're going to talk about it now. So here is the third step in this whole process is the mechanical breakdown. So this includes the chewing and the mixing with saliva, the churning of the food in the stomach, and then what's called segmentation. So segmentation is local constriction of the intestine that mixes the food with the digestive juices. So remember I said that mass of food is like the bolus. And so we want to make sure that all of the food that is in that bolus comes in contact with all of the digestive juices so that it can be further broken down. So it's almost like segmentation is like churning in that particular spot. So the bolus, basically the inside goes to the outside and the outside goes to the inside. And so it's just mixing and churning. So that's what segmentation is. Digestion is the catabolic steps that use enzymes to break down those complex food molecules, meaning carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, into their individual building blocks. Absorption is passing those fragments over from the lumen of the GI tract into the blood or the lymph. And then defecation is the elimination of anything that we were unable to digest and break down. So there's the whole idea. We start with ingestion and we get all the way through that process. So what is the relationship of the digestive organs to the peritoneum? So if you remember, the peritoneum was the serous membrane of the abdominal cavity. You had the visceral part that was actually lying on the digestive organs and the parietal portion, which was lining the body cavity or the body wall. And then you had the cavity that was in there, which is the fluid-filled space between those two peritoneums. And the fluid that's in there is what allows the organs to slide around and allows the two sheets of tissue to move past each other, just like we've seen with lots of other serous membranes. The mesentery is a double layer peritoneum. The layers are fused back to back, and this extends from the body wall to the digestive organs. This is where we're going to find the blood vessels and the lymphatics and the nerves. It also helps to hold the organs in place. So, for instance, we see this really important around the intestines. It keeps the intestines from flipping and twisting, and it also stores fat. The intraperitoneal or peritoneal organs are the organs that are located in this peritoneal area. Retroperitoneal organs are ones that are located outside of it, or they're behind this. So those are going to include the pancreas, the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine, and parts of the large intestine. So just showing you the location of some of these organs and how it's organized in a cross section. So most of your digestive organs are intraperitoneal, meaning they're inside of the peritoneal cavity, inside of those membranes, and they're suspended by the dorsal mesentery, which is the tissue that's kind of keeping them in place. There's some intraperitoneal organs that are also suspended from the body wall by the ventral mesenteries, so that they're also suspended in the front. And then there are some digestive organs that are retroperitoneal that they're not part of that cavity, that sac anymore. They're actually behind it. Peritonitis is inflammation of the peritoneum. So this can be caused by some type of piercing abdominal wound, like a gunshot wound or a stab wound. It can be caused by, unfortunately, a scalpel. If the surgeon in surgery, if the surgeon isn't using aseptic technique, or if the equipment hasn't been properly uh, uh, prepared, autoclaved. This can also happen because of a perforating ulcer or a ruptured appendix. So what happens is the peritoneal coverings stick together, and that helps them to localize the infection. It's dangerous. It can be deadly if it becomes widespread. And so to treat this, they basically have to open you up and remove all of the debris and give you oodles and tons of antibiotics. So let's look at the histology of your alimentary canal. All of your digestive organs have the same basic 4 layers or tunics. They have the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa. The mucosa is the tunic that lines the lumen. So the lumen is the middle of the tube. The functions of this, there's different layers, and they perform one or all of the functions. So they secrete mucus. This layer secretes mucus, digestive enzymes, and hormones. It can absorb the end products of digestion, go the other direction out to the blood or to the lymph, and it also helps to protect against infectious diseases. Food is not sterile, neither is water or liquids that you take in. They have bacteria in them. And so while the stomach does a pretty good job of eliminating that with the pH, there are still microbes in your food. The mucosa is made of 3 sublayers: the epithelium that is lining the lumen itself, the lamina propria, and a very, very scant layer of muscle called the muscularis mucosa. So the epithelium is simple columnar. It has mucus-secreting cells in most of the tracts. So the mouth, the esophagus, and the anus are made of stratified squamous epithelium rather than simple, again, reflecting the nature of abrasion in those areas. They secrete mucus that protects the digestive organs from the enzymes. It helps to ease the food passage. And they may also secrete enzymes and hormones, for example, in the stomach and the small intestine. The lamina propria is loose areolar connective tissue. It's got a lot of capillaries that are located in this layer. Those are needed for nourishment and absorption. We also have lymphoid follicles that help to defend against the microbes that I was just talking about. Remember, those follicles are part of the mucosal associated lymphoid tissue that we talked about back in the lymphatic chapter and the immune chapter. Then you have, again, this very scant layer of muscle associated with this layer called the muscularis mucosa. So we have a full layer of muscle later called the muscularis externa, but this one's called the muscularis mucosa. So this is smooth muscle, and it helps to produce local movements of the mucosa. So there is that very first layer we're talking about on the inside there. The submucosa is areolar connective tissue. It contains blood and lymphatic vessels. It has lymphoid follicles, and this layer has the first of 2 plexes. This one's called the submucosal nerve plexus, and it helps to supply the surrounding GI tract tissues. It has a lot of elastic tissue in it that helps the organ to get its shape back after storing large meals. The next layer out is called the muscularis externus. This is the layer that's responsible for segmentation and peristalsis. It has an inner circular muscle layer and an outer longitudinal layer. The circular layer thickens in some areas, and that's what forms the sphincters that we see in the digestive system. The serosa is the outer layer, and that's made up of the visceral peritoneum. So it's formed from areolar connective tissue with a mesothelium, which is a single layer of squamous epithelium in most organs. It's replaced by something called the fibrous adventitia in the esophagus. So the outermost layer of the esophagus is not called the serosa, it's called the adventitia. The dense connective tissue that holds the esophagus in place and the surrounding tissue structures is what this tissue does. The retroperitoneal organs have both an adventitia and a serosa. So there are those different layers that we were talking about. The splanched circulation are the arteries that branch off of the aorta to serve the digestive organs, including the hepatic and splenic and left gastric arteries, as well as the inferior and superior mesenteric arteries. So you should be familiar with all of those. The hepatic portal system is what takes the nutrient-rich but oxygen-poor blood from the digestive organs, runs it over to the liver, dumps those nutrients off in the liver, and then comes out of the top of the liver and goes into the inferior vena cava and returns that now nutrient-poor and oxygen-poor blood to the heart for reoxygenation. How do we control our digestive system? The enteric nervous system, so just like we saw with our heart, the GI tract has its own nervous system as well. It's referred to as the enteric nervous system, or the ENS, also called the gut brain. It contains more neurons than your spinal cord, surprisingly. The gut brain is made of enteric neurons that communicate a lot with one another. The major nerve supply to the GI tract wall is from these enteric neurons that control the motility of the GI. So just a interesting picture of the tract without any of the other organs around it. Enteric neurons make up the bulk of the two interconnecting intrinsic nerve plexes. So we talked about the submucosal nerve plexus. This is what regulating glands and smooth muscle in the mucosal layer, but there is also a nerve plexus in between the two layers of the muscularis externa, and that's called the myenteric nerve plexus, and it controls GI tract motility. The enteric nerve system participate in both short and long reflex arcs. So short reflexes are mediated by the enteric nerve plexus, or the gut brain, and they respond to stimuli in the GI tract. So something is actually in the GI tract, and that's what sets off the short reflexes. The long reflexes respond to stimuli arising from inside or outside of the gut, such as the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic system, the side of the sympathetic the autonomic nervous system that we consider the brakes. This is one of the systems that we talk about that the parasympathetic actually speeds up. So this digestive system is actually sped up by the parasympathetic side and slowed down by the sympathetic, which is the opposite of most of the systems. So just a neural reflex pathway and how it's initiated inside and outside of the gastrointestinal tract. The basic concepts of regulating digestive activity, there's three key concepts that are going to regulate the activity of the gastrointestinal tube. The digestive activity is provoked by a range of mechanical and chemical stimuli. There are lots and lots of receptors in the walls of the GI tract. They respond to stretch. They respond to changes in the osmolarity, which is basically the saltiness, changes in the pH, the presence of substrate, and of end products of digestion. So there's a lot of things that are considered stimuli for the GI tract. The effectors of the digestive glands are smooth muscles and glands. So when these are stimulated, the receptors initiate reflexes that stimulate the smooth muscle to mix and move the lumen contents through that process of peristalsis and segmentation. The reflexes can also activate or inhibit digestive glands that are secreting different substances or hormones. And then number three, the neurons, both intrinsic and extrinsic, and the hormones control digestive activity. So the nervous system control, the intrinsic control involve the short reflexes. We call that the enteric nervous system. The extrinsic controls involve the long reflexes, and we call those the autonomic nervous system. What about hormones? We haven't talked about hormones a whole lot recently, but we're getting ready to start talking about them again. Hormones from the cells in the stomach and the small intestine are what stimulate or the target cells in the same or in different organs to secrete or to contract. So hormones are causing contractions or secretions of at the different organs that are associated with the digestive tract. So let's kind of just take a tour going from the mouth all the way through of the digestive system. So the mouth is where the food is chewed and mixed with the enzyme-containing saliva that begins the process of digestion, and the swallowing process is initiated. So the associated organs in this case include the mouth, the tongue, the salivary glands, and the teeth. So at the mouth, we call it the oral or the buccal cavity, and it's bound on the front by your lips, by the cheeks on the side. The top or the roof of your mouth is called the palate, and then the tongue at the bottom. The oral orifice is the anterior opening. The walls of the mouth are lined by stratified squamous. We've talked about that lots of times. It is non-keratinized. These multiple layers of cells are tough and they help to resist abrasion. The cells of the gums, the hard palate, and part of the tongue are keratinized for extra protection, but the majority of the mouth is stratified squamous, non-keratinized. Lips and cheeks. The lips are also known as the labia. These are the orbicularis oris muscles. So if you remember back to 210, the orbicularis oris was the kissing muscle, the muscle that goes around, encircles your mouth. So when we put the skin on top of that, that's what your lips are. The cheeks are the buccinator or buccinator muscles. The oral vestibule is the recess internal to the lips, going to the cheeks and external to the teeth and the gum. So it's that space between your cheek and your gum. The oral cavity proper is the area that lies within the teeth and gums. And then the labial frenulum is the medium attachment of each lip to the gum on the upper and lower lip. So some of the structures I was just talking about and the ones that we have already viewed in our lab. The palate forms the roof of the mouth. Remember, that is also the floor of the nasal cavity and has two distinct parts. There's the hard palate that's made from the palatine bones and the palatine process of the maxilla with a midline ridge that's called the raphe. The mucosa is corrugated. We talked about this over in our lab, and that helps to create friction against the tongue. So if you take a piece of gum and you press it up against the roof of your mouth and you take it out, you'll notice that it has ridges on it. The soft palate is formed mostly of skeletal muscle. It's what closes off the nasopharynx when you're swallowing so that food and water don't go up into your nose. Laterally, the soft arches anchored to the tongue are called the palatine glossal arches. The also anchored to the wall of the oropharynx by the palopharyngeal arches, and the area in between the two arches is called the fauces. The palatine tonsils that you are already aware of are located in those fauces. The uvula is a little projection that hangs down from the free edge of the soft palate in the middle of your throat. So some of the structures we were just talking about. The tongue occupies the floor of the mouth. It's made of interlacing bundles of skeletal muscle. What are the functions of your tongue? It grips, repositions, and mixes food during chewing, and in that process it forms a mass of food, which is called the bolus. This is the tongue also is responsible for initiating swallowing, speech, and for taste. The intrinsic muscles of the tongue change the shape of the tongue. The extrinsic muscles alter the tongue's position. And we talked about the lingual frenulum, which is what attaches the tongue to the floor of the mouth. The superior surface of the tongue has the papilla. These are peg-like projections of underlying mucosa. There are 4 different shapes to those papilla. The filiform are the ones that give the tongue its roughness to provide friction. That one does not have any taste buds, and it's what gives your tongue a whitish appearance. The fungiform papilla are the mushroom-shaped ones that are scattered all over the tongue. They have a core in the middle that makes them give the tongue a reddish appearance. The valate or circumvallate papilla are 8 to 12 very large papilla that form a V in a row at the back of the tongue, and the foliate, which are located on the lateral aspects of the posterior tongue. The terminal sulcus is the groove located posterior to those valate papilla, and the marked division between it marks the division between the body of the tongue and the root of the tongue. So the body of the tongue is what's actually in the oral cavity. The root is the part that goes down into the oral pharynx. The terminal sulcus does not have any papilla, but it does feel bumpy because it's where we find the lingual tonsil, which lies deep to the mucosa. So there is a picture of all of those different types of papilla and the lingual tonsil and the palatine tonsils. Ankyloglossia is a congenital condition in which children are born with an extremely short lingual frenulum. I talked about this a little bit in lab. This is so the tip of the tongue can't move like it's supposed to, so we refer to it as being tongue-tied or a fused tongue. It restricts their tongue movements, and so it can cause problems with their speech. Most notably, they'll have a lisp, but the big issue with this is that they can't suckle, so they can't latch on to nurse, and so that's a really big deal, not just with a nursing like a breastfeeding, but also even with a bottle. The treatment is that they actually use a laser now to snip the frenulum. What about your salivary glands? Their function is to produce saliva, and the function of saliva is to clean your mouth, dissolve the food chemicals for taste. So if you remember back in Bio 210 when we talked about things come into your mouth for you to taste, they have to be dissolved in liquid for the taste receptors to pick them up. Saliva moistens the food, it compacts it into that bolus, and it begins the breakdown of starch or complex carbohydrates. So the enzyme that is responsible for do that is called salivary amylase. And so the breakdown of carbohydrate actually starts in your mouth. So that's the only one that starts in the mouth. Most of the saliva produced by the major extrinsic salivary glands are located outside of the oral cavity. There are some minor salivary glands scattered within the oral cavity. The major glands that we talk about, the parotid, which is the one that's right in front of your ears and external to the masseter muscle. The parotid duct opens into the oral vestibule next to the second upper molar. The submandibular is medial to the body of the mandible. The duct opens at the base of the lingual frenulum on both sides, and the sublingual is anterior to the submandibular gland, and it's under your tongue. It has 10 to 12 ducts that open in the floor of the mouth. So the green tubes you see there are the ducts, so you can see where those go. So the salivary glands are an exocrine gland. They are making a product and they're delivering it to the surface of something. In this case, it's the surface of your oral cavity, and using a duct to do that. So that is what qualifies them as an exocrine gland. There is what the salivary gland looks like underneath of a microscope. So salivary glands are composed of two types of secretory cells. You have the serous cells, which produce a watery secretion, enzymes, ions, and a bit of mucin. And then you have the mucus cells, which produce mucus. The parotid and submandibular glands contain mostly serous cells, but the sublingual glands also consist mostly of mucus cells. So the point to that is that the three different types of salivary glands produce different types of saliva. Mumps is inflammation of the parotid glands that's caused by a virus, the myxovirus. It's a common children's disease. It can spread from person to person via saliva. So if you drink after someone or eat after someone, then that's how this is spread. The symptoms are that you have pain when you try to open the mouth, or that you chew, a moderate fever, pain when you swallow acidic foods like pickles and grape juice or grapefruit juice, or any juice in particular. So measles, mumps, and rubella is part of the immunizations, the MMR that most people get. So you don't really see a lot of mumps, but there have been some isolated cases of mumps coming back up. The big concern about mumps is that if an individual that has already gone into puberty, for a male, the mumps virus can infect the testes and lead to sterility. So you don't want an adult that has not had this condition or been immunized, adult male, to get it. So what is the composition of saliva? It's mostly water, 97 to 99.5%. It is hypoosmotic. It is slightly acidic with a pH between 6.75 and 7. It has electrolytes in it, sodium ions, potassium ions, chloride, so on, bicarbonate. Salivary amylase, I mentioned that already. It also has an enzyme called lingual lipase that can start the beginning breakdown of fat, but not in the same way that salivary amylase does. It basically just makes the fat molecule a little bit smaller. There's proteins in there, including mucin, lysozyme, and IgA. There's metabolic waste like urea and uric acid. Lysozyme, IgA, defensin, nitric oxide, and from the nitrates in food all help to protect against the microorganisms in our mouth. How do we control our salivation? Surprisingly, you make 1,500 milliliters or 1.5 liters of spit every single day. So that's actually a lot more than most people are aware of. The minor glands continuously help keep the mouth moist. The major salivary glands are activated when the parasympathetic nervous system activates them, again, because this is part of our digestive system. Ingested food stimulates the chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors in the mouth, and it sends signals to the salivatory nuclei in the brainstem that stimulates those parasympathetic impulses along cranial nerve number 7 and 9 to the glands. You have strong sympathetic stimulation that inhibits salivation and results in a dry mouth. So when you are in fight or flight, you might notice that your mouth goes really, really dry. That's called xerostomia. Um, Smell inside of food or an upset GI tract can act as a stimuli as well. Although most of us are not like Pavlovian dogs, but sometimes it does cause you to increase more saliva when you hear or smell food. So anything that inhibits saliva secretion can promote tooth decay, so the lack of saliva also makes it difficult to talk and to eat. Halitosis is bad breath. It's caused by decomposing food particles that accumulate, and that causes bacteria to flourish because you're basically feeding the bacteria in your mouth. The odor is caused mainly by the metabolic activity of the anaerobic bacteria on the back of your tongue, which is why you should brush your tongue every single day. These bacteria can produce hydrogen sulfide, which is the chemical that gives eggs that rotten smell when they go bad. Methyl mercaptan, which is the chemical that is found in fecal material. Cadaverine, which is associated with rotting corpses and other smelly chemicals. So some of you have experienced morning breath and those kinds of things before, and a lot of those examples, those chemicals there certainly describe that. The teeth lie in the sockets in the gum that are covered by gum-covered margins of the mandible and the maxilla. So teeth are actually bones, and they are held into your jawbones, your maxilla, and your mandible in articulations that are called gum fosses. Mastication is the process of chewing that tears and grinds that food into smaller fragments. Dentition and the dental formula, we looked at this in lab just a little bit. The primary dentition consists of 20 deciduous teeth. We call those baby teeth or milk teeth that erupt between 6 months and 24 months of age. And then you have 32 permanent teeth that enlarge and develop when the roots of the milk teeth have resorbed from below and cause them to loosen and fall out. That starts around the age of 5 or 6 and continues until all of the deciduous teeth have fallen out and the permanent teeth plus some others have replaced it. All but the third molars, which are considered your wisdom teeth, are in by the end of adolescence. The third molars may or may not emerge, and if they do, it can be all the way up to the age of 25. Teeth are classified according to the shape. So incisors are the ones for cutting or snipping. Canines are fang-like teeth for tearing or piercing. Premolars are bicuspids that have broad crowns with a round cusp that we use to crush and grind things. And then molars have even broader crowns, rounded cusps, and are better grinders because they have more surface area. During chewing, the upper and lower molars lock together and create an enormous, tremendous crushing force, as you well know if you've ever accidentally bit the inside of your mouth or bit your tongue. So there are the patterns. So when we look at the teeth, There are 4 quadrants in the mouth that run from the central incisor back to the wisdom tooth, and those patterns are the same in each quadrant. So the dental formula is shorthand indicator of the number and position of the teeth that shows the ratio of upper to lower teeth for only half of the mouth. The other side is the mirror image, right? And so we have the primary teeth, and they give you the abbreviation 2 eyes, 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 molars, that kind of thing. Upper jaw, lower jaw, those are your primary teeth for 20 teeth, and then how you get your permanent teeth, which is 32 teeth. The tooth structure, each tooth has 2 major regions. It has the crown, which is the part above the gum line or the gingiva. It's covered by enamel, which is the hardest substance in your body, even harder than bone. It is heavily mineralized with calcium salts and hydroxyapatite cells. The enamel producing cells degenerate when the tooth erupts, so there is no healing if the tooth decays or cracks. It needs artificial repair, so you can't make new enamel on your teeth. The root is the portion that is embedded in the jawbone. It's connected to the crown by the neck. Canines, incisors, and premolars only have 1 root. The first upper premolar often has 2. The first 2 upper molars have 3 roots. The first 2 lower molars only have 2. And the third molar root, very often a single fused root. Cement is the calcified connective tissue that holds the tooth in place, helps to anchor it, and it attaches it to the periodontal ligament. The periodontal ligament is what forms the fibrous joint called the gomphosis, and it's what truly anchors the tooth into the alveolus or the bony socket. The gingival sulcus is the groove where the gingiva borders the tooth. And the dentin is the bone-like material under the enamel that is maintained by the odontoblast of pulp cavity. The pulp cavity is surrounded by the dentin, and pulp is your connective tissue, your blood vessels, and your nerves. The root canal is the narrow channel way that the pulp travels down to the root of the tooth, and the apical foramen at the proximal end of the tooth is where the blood vessels and nerves enter and exit. So there's all those structures we were just talking about. An impacted tooth is a tooth that remains trapped in the jawbone. So that happens often with wisdom teeth. And it can cause a lot of pressure and pain, and so they surgically remove them. Dental caries is just a big old fancy name for cavities. This is demineralization of the enamel and dentin from bacterial action. Plaque is a film of sugar, bacteria, and debris, what we call a biofilm, that attaches to the teeth. It acts it's the acid from the bacteria is what dissolves the calcium salts, and the proteolytic enzymes digest the organic matter. The prevention for this is daily brushing and flossing. Gingivitis is when the plaque calcifies to form a tartar or calculus. The calculus disrupts the seal between the gingiva and the teeth and allows the anaerobic bacteria to infect the gums. The infection is reversible if the calculus is removed. Periodontal disease, this is when you neglect the gingiva, and that can escalate to disease. The immune systems attack not only the bacteria but also your body tissues. That can destroy the periodontal ligament, that can activate the osteoclasts, which lead to dissolving the bone and possibly losing the tooth. That may increase your risk for heart disease and stroke 2 ways. It promotes atherosclerotic plaque formation, and it also allows bacteria that have entered into the blood to cause clot formation in the coronary and cerebral arteries. So risk factors of periodontal disease include smoking, diabetes, and oral piercings. Okay, so that is the first of 3 lectures on digestive. I'll see you for the next part.